In the vast, cold expanse of the galaxy, peace was a delicate thread constantly on the verge of snapping. The galactic civilizations had long enjoyed an uneasy truce, maintained by treaties and fragile alliances. For centuries, they believed that their collective strength was unshakable, their technology unrivaled, and their dominance over the stars absolute. But then came the void threat, a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. It swept through star systems, devouring worlds, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. No weapon could harm it, no fleet could stop it, and no strategy seemed to work. Desperation seeped into every corner of the galaxy. For the first time, the great powers were united not by diplomacy but by fear. When the Galactic Council convened, the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful species stood in grim silence. These beings, once confident in their supremacy, now looked like fragile creatures clutching at straws. The reports from the Outer Rim were worse than anyone had expected. Billions lost, planets reduced to barren husks, and the void threat moving ever closer to the galactic core. Every race had tried to face it, and every race had failed. The council chambers were filled with arguments and accusations. The avians blamed the reptilian archons. The archons pointed fingers at the aquatic viserians. Old grudges flared up, even in the face of annihilation. But then, from a shadowed corner of the room, a voice broke through the chaos. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made everyone fall silent. "We haven't tried everything," said the human envoy. The other council members turned to him, some sneering, others simply dismissive. Humanity was still considered a minor player on the galactic stage. Their advancements in technology were decades behind the others, and their colonies were limited to the quieter regions of space. To most of the galaxy, humans were an afterthought, a young race that had yet to prove itself worthy of the stars. "What could your people possibly offer?" scoffed a towering Archon general. "Your fleets are primitive. Your weapons are outdated. You wouldn't last a day against the void threat." The human didn't flinch at the insult. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze steady. "We've survived on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. We've fought each other for centuries, perfected the art of war, and thrived in the face of chaos. You might see us as weak because we don't have your technology, but strength isn't about what you have, it's about what you're willing to do. And we're willing to do whatever it takes." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The other species didn't like admitting it, but there was something unsettlingly confident about the humans' words. Humanity's reputation was that of resilience, adaptability, and a stubborn refusal to give up, no matter the odds. "What do you propose?" asked a Viserian diplomat, her voice cautious but intrigued. The human envoy smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Give us the problem. Let us fight the void threat. We'll do what needs to be done, and we won't stop until it's over." The chamber erupted into laughter. The very idea was absurd. Humanity's fleets were a fraction of the size of the galactic powers. Their resources were limited, and their soldiers were inexperienced in interstellar warfare. But as the laughter died down, the humans still stood there, unshaken. "You think this is funny?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Fine. Laugh. But remember this: while you sit here bickering and waiting for someone else to save you, billions more will die. Entire worlds will fall. And when you're finally ready to act, it'll be too late. We may not have your technology, but we have something you don't. We have heart. We have courage. And we have the ability to fight as if our very existence depends on it, because it does." Silence fell over the room again, heavier this time. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They couldn't deny the truth in the humans' words. Their fleets had failed. Their strategies had failed. Perhaps it was time to try something different, something unpredictable. Reluctantly, the council agreed. Humanity would be given command of a coalition fleet, a mix of ships and resources from various species. It was a token effort, really no one truly believed they would succeed. But the humans didn't care about the odds. They cared about the mission. The Coalition fleet assembled at the edge of known space, a patchwork of alien designs and technologies. It was a sight to behold sleek Viserion cruisers alongside brutish Archon warships, fragile avian scouts flitting between them like birds among giants. And at the center of it all was the human flagship, a rugged, practical vessel built not for elegance but for endurance. The fleet's alien crews watched the humans with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The humans were an odd bunch, unpredictable, emotional, and most baffling of all, hopeful. They didn't act like a species facing certain death. Instead, they joked, laughed, and worked with a determination that was almost infectious. As the fleet prepared to jump into the Void Threat's territory, the human leader addressed the crews. His words were simple, direct, and filled with a quiet intensity that left no room for doubt. "We're not here to die," he said, his voice echoing through the calm channels. "We're here to win. I won't lie to you, this enemy is unlike anything we've ever faced. But if there's one thing humanity knows, it's how to fight the impossible. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. Stick together. Watch each other's backs. And remember, no matter how dark it gets out there, we are the light." The fleet jumped, disappearing into the unknown. On the other side, they found chaos. The Void Threat was a massive, shifting entity, its form constantly changing as it absorbed matter and energy. It was a living storm, a force of nature that defied understanding. The fleet's first engagement was brutal. Ships were torn apart, entire squadrons lost in the blink of an eye. But the humans didn't panic. They adapted. They learned. While the other species relied on rigid tactics and protocols, the humans fought with creativity and instinct. They turned debris into weapons, used the Void Threat's own attacks against it, and coordinated with an efficiency that was almost terrifying. Slowly but surely, they began to push back. For the first time in months, the Void Threat showed signs of retreating. The Coalition crews, once skeptical of their human commanders, found themselves inspired by their courage and ingenuity. These were not the weak, inexperienced beings they had dismissed. These were warriors, fighters who refused to give up, no matter the odds. But victory was still far away. The Void Threat was far from defeated, and the humans knew it. As the fleet regrouped, the human leader stood on the bridge of his ship, staring out at the darkness ahead. He knew the cost of what they were doing. He knew many of them wouldn't make it back. Yet, as he looked at the faces of his crew, alien and human alike, he felt a spark of hope. They had come this far. They had proven that they could stand against the impossible. And as long as they kept fighting, there was a chance, a slim, fragile chance, that they could save the galaxy. The next phase of the mission would be even harder. The Void Threat was learning, adapting to their strategies. But the humans had one advantage: the enemy could never take away their spirit. And in a galaxy on the brink of destruction, that spirit might just be enough. As the fleet prepared for its next jump, the human leader took a deep breath. The galaxy needed heroes, and humanity had answered the call. Now, it was time to see if they could finish what they had started. The fleet drifted in silence, the only sounds coming from the hum of ship engines and the faint chatter of crew communications. Out here, in the vast, cold darkness of uncharted space, even the stars seemed distant and faint. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on every soul in the Coalition. Most of them had never faced anything like the Void Threat before. Even those who had survived the earlier battles could feel the fear creeping in, a quiet voice in the back of their minds whispering that this might be the end. For the human commander, that weight was heavier than ever. He stood on the bridge of his ship, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of the Void Threat visible in the distance. It was mesmerizing in a way, like staring into a storm that shouldn't exist. He'd spent sleepless nights reading reports, analyzing patterns, trying to understand the enemy. But the void threat was beyond logic, beyond reason. It didn't behave like anything he'd ever seen or studied. It was alive yet not. It had a purpose, but no one could figure out what that purpose was. He turned to his crew, his gaze sweeping across the diverse group of beings who now trusted him with their lives. Most of them were not human. An avian communications officer perched near her console, her feathers shimmering faintly in the dim light. An Archon weapons specialist stood at his post, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he ran through battle simulations. A Viserion engineer floated near the ceiling, her aquatic body encased in a transparent suit filled with water. And then there were the humans, men and women who carried themselves with quiet determination, their faces set with a stubborn refusal to give in to despair. This was what made humanity different, he thought. Not their technology or their numbers, but their ability to bring people together, to turn strangers into allies and allies into family. It was the reason the Council had finally agreed to let the humans take charge. They might not be the strongest or the smartest, but they were the ones who could inspire hope when there was none. Status report, the commander said, breaking the silence. Scans show the void threat is holding its position, the avian officer replied, her voice calm but tight with tension. No signs of movement, but it's growing. Slowly, but steadily. The commander frowned. That was the other thing about the void threat, its constant, relentless growth. Even when it wasn't attacking, it was consuming, expanding, taking more and more space for itself. If they didn't stop it here, it wouldn't just consume the galaxy. It would spread beyond, into the infinite void, until there was nothing left. Engineering? He asked, turning to the Viserion. Repairs are complete on the forward shields, she said, her voice distorted slightly by the water in her suit. But our power reserves are still critical. If we push the engines too hard in the next engagement, we risk a full systems shutdown. He nodded grimly. Every battle was taking its toll on the fleet. Resources were running low, and there was no chance of resupply out here. They were on their own, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. And the void threat knew it. Commander, the Archon weapons specialist said, his voice a low growl, we can't keep fighting like this. We need a plan, a real plan. Something that can end this once and for all. The commander exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The Archon was right. They couldn't afford to keep chipping away at the void threat, losing ships and lives in the process. They needed a decisive strike, a way to cut to the heart of the enemy. But that was easier said than done. The void threat didn't have a single point of weakness. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. We'll find a way, he said finally, his voice steady. We always do. The Archon didn't look convinced, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned back to his console, his claws tapping impatiently on the controls. The bridge fell silent again, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. But then, out of nowhere, an alert blared through the ship. Everyone froze, their eyes snapping to the main display. A new signal had appeared, faint but unmistakable, coming from deep within the void threat's territory. What is that? The commander asked, his voice sharp. The avian officer worked quickly, her talons flying across the controls. It's a distress signal. Human origin. The bridge erupted into murmurs. A human distress signal? Out here? It didn't make sense. There were no human colonies in this region, no ships that could have survived this deep into the void threat's domain. And yet, the signal was clear. Can you pinpoint the source? The commander asked, his heart pounding. Not exactly, the avian said, her feathers ruffling in agitation. The signal is weak and fragmented, but it's coming from somewhere near the void threat's core. The commander's mind raced. If there really was a human presence out there, it could change everything. But it could also be a trap. The void threat was intelligent, in its own way. It had already proven it could learn and adapt. Was it possible that it had figured out how to mimic human technology? We can't ignore it, he said finally, his voice firm. If there's even a chance that someone's out there, we have to investigate. Commander, with all due respect, the Archon said, his tone heavy with doubt, this could be a suicide mission. We barely survived the last encounter, and now you want to take us deeper into enemy territory? I know the risks, the commander said, meeting the Archon's gaze. But if there's someone out there, they might have information, something we can use to fight back. And if it's a trap, then we need to know that too. Sitting here and doing nothing isn't an option. The Archon growled low in his throat but didn't argue further. The rest of the crew looked uneasy, but they trusted the commander. They had to. He was their best hope of making it out of this alive. The fleet adjusted course, heading toward the source of the signal. As they moved deeper into the Void Threat's territory, the darkness seemed to close in around them. The swirling patterns of the entity became more chaotic, more aggressive, like a living maze designed to confuse and disorient. Sensors picked up strange readings, fluctuations in energy, bursts of radiation, and strange, fleeting shapes that seemed to move just out of sight. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Even the humans, with their unshakable determination, looked nervous. The commander could feel it too, a gnawing sense of dread that he couldn't shake. But he pushed it aside. Fear wouldn't help them now. Hours passed, and the signal grew stronger. It was definitely human, but it didn't match any known frequency or protocol. That only deepened the mystery. Who were they? How had they survived out here? And why hadn't anyone heard from them before? Finally, they reached the source. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. A massive structure loomed in the darkness, partially embedded within the Void Threat itself. It was ancient, its surface covered in strange, organic growths that pulsed faintly with light. But beneath the alien corruption, the design was unmistakably human. This was no distress beacon. It was a ship, or what was left of one. The crew stared in stunned silence as the sensors scanned the structure. It was enormous, far larger than any human ship on record. And yet, the design was familiar, echoing elements of Earth's earliest spacefaring vessels. It was as if someone had taken humanity's old blueprints and scaled them up to an unimaginable size. Commander, the avian officer said, her voice trembling, the signal is coming from inside that thing. And there's more. I'm detecting life signs. Human life signs. The commander's breath caught. Against all odds, there were people alive in that ship or whatever it had become. But the question remained, how? And why were they here, so deep in enemy territory? Before anyone could process the discovery, the Void Threat began to react. The swirling patterns around the ship grew more violent, tendrils of energy lashing out like living creatures defending their home. The enemy knew they were here. Shields up! The commander barked. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The bridge erupted into action as the crew scrambled to respond. The Void Threat was coming for them, and they had no choice but to fight. But even as the battle began, the commander's thoughts were elsewhere. Who were these humans? How had they survived out here? And most importantly, could they hold the key to defeating the Void Threat? They would have to find out, and fast. Because the galaxy's last hope might be hidden inside that ancient, corrupted ship. The ship shuddered violently as the Void Threat lashed out with its tendrils of energy, testing the fleet's defenses. The commander gripped the edge of his console, bracing himself as the bridge lights flickered. Around him, the crew worked with precision, their voices calm but quick as they relayed information and executed orders. This was it. They were no longer spectators or explorers. They were in the heart of the storm now, and there was no turning back. The ancient, corrupted human ship loomed ahead, its silhouette a dark, jagged outline against the chaotic light of the Void Threat. It seemed almost alive, pulsating with an eerie rhythm that matched the enemy's attacks. Every instinct told the commander to keep his distance, to retreat and regroup, but he couldn't ignore the signal or the faint signs of life coming from within. Whoever or whatever was inside that ship could be the key to ending this nightmare or the final piece of a trap they had walked straight into. Focus all power to the forward shields, the commander barked. We need to get closer. Engineering, keep those systems stable no matter what. The Viserion engineer's voice crackled over the comms. Pushing the reactors this hard could overload the core, Commander. If we lose stability, then we lose everything, the commander cut in. Do what you have to. Just buy us enough time. The ship surged forward, cutting through the waves of energy like a blade. Behind it, the rest of the fleet struggled to hold formation. Smaller ships darted in and out, drawing the Void threat's attention with quick, surgical strikes, while the larger vessels focused on maintaining a defensive perimeter. But the Void threat was relentless. Its tendrils wrapped around one of the frigates, crushing it like a toy before anyone could respond. The explosion lit up the darkness, a brief, terrible reminder of what was at stake. Inside the bridge, the tension was suffocating. The avian communications officer flinched with every tremor, her feathers flaring as she worked to keep the signal locked. The Archon weapons specialist growled under his breath, his claws gripping the edge of his console. Even the humans, known for their resilience, were starting to show cracks. But the commander refused to let fear take over. Not now. How much closer can we get? He asked, his eyes fixed on the corrupted ship. Another 2 kilometers before we're in range to send a team aboard, the avian replied, her voice strained. But the Void threat's activity is increasing. It's like it knows what we're trying to do. Of course it does, the Archon growled. It's protecting whatever's inside that thing. The commander didn't respond. He couldn't afford to. His mind was racing, weighing the risks, searching for any clue that might tip the scales in their favor. The Void threat was reacting to their movements, yes, but there was something more. The way it shifted and pulsed around the ship felt deliberate, almost intelligent. It wasn't just an enemy. It was a predator, watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Commander, the avian said suddenly, her voice rising in alarm. The signal's changing. It's transmitting something. What do you mean? He asked sharply. What's it transmitting? I don't know, she admitted, her talons tapping furiously at her console. It's not a distress call anymore. It's coordinates. A location deeper inside the Void threat. The bridge fell silent. Coordinates? From a ship that had been lost to the Void threat for who knew how long? It didn't make sense. But then, none of this did. It's a trap, the Archon said, his voice cold. You know it is. Maybe, the commander replied. But if it's not, then someone's trying to tell us something. Someone who might know how to fight this thing. And if it's a trap, we'll all die for nothing, the Archon shot back. The commander met his gaze, unflinching. We'll die if we do nothing too. This might be our only chance. The Archon growled low in his throat but didn't argue further. The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. They all knew the risks. They just didn't have any better options. Prepare a boarding team, the commander ordered. I'll lead it myself. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Leading the team was a dangerous gamble, but it was also a statement. If he was going to ask his crew to risk their lives, he had to be willing to do the same. The boarding party assembled quickly, a mix of humans and aliens armed with the best weapons and equipment they had left. As they prepared to launch, the commander stood before them, his expression calm but resolute. You all know what's at stake, he said, his voice steady. We don't know what we'll find in there, but whatever it is, it could be the key to saving everything we care about. Stay focused. Stay together. And no matter what happens, remember that you're not alone. We're all in this together. The team nodded, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They knew the odds, but they also knew what was at stake. There was no room for hesitation now. The boarding craft launched, weaving through the chaos as the fleet continued to hold the void threat at bay. The corrupted ship loomed larger and larger, its surface writhing with alien growths that seemed to react to their presence. As they drew closer, the commander could feel the weight of the enemy's attention shifting toward them. It was like stepping into the jaws of a beast, knowing it could snap shut at any moment. The craft docked with the ship, its hull groaning as it locked into place. The boarding team moved quickly, cutting through the overgrown entryway and stepping into the unknown. The interior was a nightmare, a labyrinth of twisted metal and organic growths, pulsating with faint, sickly light. The air was thick and heavy, filled with an unnatural hum that seemed to vibrate in their bones. "Stay close," the commander said, his voice low but firm. "And keep an eye on your scanners. We don't know what's in here." The team moved cautiously, their weapons raised as they navigated the maze-like corridors. The signal grew stronger with every step, pulling them deeper into the ship. But so did the sense of wrongness, the feeling that they were being watched. And then they saw it. A chamber at the heart of the ship, filled with a strange, glowing substance that seemed to pulse in time with the void threat outside. In the center of the chamber stood a figure, human in shape but cloaked in shadow, their features obscured by the eerie light. They turned slowly as the team entered, their movements deliberate and unnatural. "Who are you?" the commander demanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. "What is this place?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, they raised a hand, and the chamber seemed to come alive. The walls shifted and pulsed, the light growing brighter and more chaotic. The void threat was reacting, its tendrils lashing out in fury as if the ship itself had been awakened. The commander's heart pounded as he realized the truth. This wasn't just a ship. It was something more, something connected to the void threat in ways they couldn't yet understand. And the figure before them was the key. Whether they were ally or enemy, he didn't know. But one thing was certain, this was the moment everything would change. The glowing figure in the center of the chamber tilted its head, a motion that felt almost human but carried an unsettling edge. The commander kept his weapon steady, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. The void threat's energy surged outside the ship, shaking its hull violently. Whatever was happening here, the figure was at the center of it, and time was running out. The figure finally spoke, but not with words. The sound that came from it was a low, resonant hum that echoed through the team's comms and seemed to bypass theirs entirely, settling directly in their minds. It wasn't a language, yet they understood it all the same. The message was clear and chilling. "You are too late." The commander's breath caught. The figure's voice wasn't just a warning, it carried a finality that sent ice through his veins. He glanced at his team, their faces pale with confusion and fear, but they held their positions. None of them dared to speak. Every second felt like it might provoke the figure into action. "What do you mean?" the commander finally said, his voice steady but strained. "Who are you? What is this place?" The figure raised its hand again, and the pulsing energy in the chamber intensified. Symbols began to appear in the air, patterns that flickered and shifted, ancient and alien yet disturbingly familiar. The commander's heart sank as he recognized them. They weren't from another race or some forgotten civilization. They were human. Old, long-buried marks of humanity's past, etched into the very heart of this nightmare. The symbols told a story, one that unfolded before the team like a living memory. It showed a time long before the Galactic Alliance, before humanity had spread to the stars. It depicted scientists and engineers working tirelessly on a project to combat a threat they barely understood, a force they had called the Void. The ship they now stood in had been their final creation, a weapon designed to turn the tide. But something had gone horribly wrong. The team watched in horrified silence as the story played out. The weapon had succeeded in pushing back the Void, but at a cost. The ship had been consumed, its crew twisted and corrupted by the very power they sought to control. And now, centuries later, it had returned, drawn back into the conflict like a ghost from humanity's darkest hour. The commander clenched his jaw, his mind racing. This wasn't just a ship. It was a tomb, a relic of humanity's arrogance and desperation. And the figure before them wasn't just some remnant of the crew. It was something else entirely, something born from the ship's corruption, tethered to the void in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. "We can stop this," the commander said, his voice firm despite the chaos swirling around them. "Whatever happened here, we can fix it. We just need to know how." The figure's head tilted again, and for a moment, the commander thought he saw a flicker of something in its glowing form. It wasn't anger or malice. It was almost sorrow. But the moment passed, and the figure's voice filled their minds once more. "You misunderstand. This is not your fight to win." Before the commander could respond, the chamber erupted with light. The walls seemed to dissolve, revealing the void threat in all its terrible glory. Tendrils of energy lashed out, piercing the ship's hull and sending tremors through its structure. The team staggered, their weapons useless against the onslaught. But then, something unexpected happened. The corrupted ship began to react, its twisted metal and glowing veins coming to life. The energy from the void threat wasn't destroying it, it was fueling it. The ship was awakening, its systems surging back online as if responding to the void's attack. And the figure in the center of the chamber wasn't resisting. It was guiding the process. The commander's blood ran cold. He realized with dawning horror that the ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a beacon. The void threat hadn't come to destroy it. It had come to reclaim it. "Fall back," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We have to get out of here now." The team moved as one, racing back through the corridors as the ship began to transform around them. Walls shifted and reformed, cutting off paths and forcing them to find alternate routes. The glow of the ship's energy grew brighter, pulsing in time with the void threat outside. It was alive, and it was waking up. As they reached the docking bay, the commander glanced back. The figure was still in the chamber, its form merging with the ship's glowing veins. It was no longer just a presence, it was becoming part of the ship itself, a living extension of its corrupted power. And as the team boarded their craft, he saw the final, terrible truth etched into the chamber's walls. The void threat hadn't created this ship. Humanity had. The commander's mind raced as the craft launched, narrowly avoiding the ship's shifting tendrils. He couldn't process what he had just seen. The ancient fleet, the stories of humanity's forgotten past, they weren't just legends. They were warnings. Humanity had faced the void before, and in their desperation, they had unleashed something even worse. Now, that mistake was coming back to haunt them. The void threat's energy surged again, this time lashing out at the fleet. Ships exploded in rapid succession, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer force of the attack. The commander watched in helpless fury as his crew called out for reinforcements, their voices strained and desperate. The corrupted ship was fully active now, its energy feeding the void threat and amplifying its power. They had come here to stop the enemy, but they had only made it stronger. As the fleet scrambled to regroup, a new signal cut through the chaos. It wasn't coming from the corrupted ship or the void threat. It was coming from deep within human space, a faint but unmistakable message on an ancient frequency. The commander's heart pounded as he recognized the call sign. It was from another ship, one that had been lost centuries ago, presumed destroyed along with the rest of the ancient fleet. The implications hit him like a blow. If this signal was real, then the corrupted ship wasn't the only relic of humanity's past still out there. There were others, scattered across the galaxy, waiting to be found or awakened. And if the void threat had found one, it could find the others. The commander's hands tightened into fists as he stared at the glowing, pulsating ship in the distance. They had uncovered a truth far more dangerous than they had imagined. The Void threat wasn't just an external enemy. It was tied to humanity's greatest sins, their desperate attempts to survive no matter the cost. And now, that legacy was threatening to destroy them all. As the fleet prepared for one final stand, the commander knew they were out of time. The Void threat was growing stronger with every passing moment, and the corrupted ship was only the beginning. If they couldn't stop it here, the galaxy would face a darkness unlike anything it had ever known. The battle wasn't over, but the stakes had never been higher. The commander's voice cut through the comms, steady and resolute despite the chaos around him. All ships, prepare for emergency maneuvers. We're not done yet. The fleet was in chaos, its once coordinated formations shattered under the relentless assault of the Void threat. The corrupted ship loomed in the distance, its energy now fully synchronized with the Void's malevolent force. The commander stood at the center of the bridge, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. Alarms blared, and the voices of his crew filled the air, a mixture of determination and barely contained fear. He knew this was it. There wouldn't be another chance. Divert all power to the forward shields, he barked, his tone sharp. Focus fire on the Void's tendrils cut off its connection to the ship. As the fleet adjusted its tactics, beams of concentrated energy lanced out from their weapons, striking the writhing tendrils that linked the Void threat to the corrupted ship. For a moment, the strategy seemed to work. The Void's hold wavered, its energy flickering as if recoiling from the concentrated assault. But the reprieve was brief. The corrupted ship retaliated, its systems now fully alive and responding with a precision that bordered on sentience. The commander's heart sank as he realized the corrupted ship wasn't just acting defensively. It was learning. Every strike they made was met with a calculated counter, as if the ship was adapting in real time. It was no longer just a relic of humanity's past, it was evolving into something far more dangerous. Commander! One of his officers called out, her voice trembling. The signal from deep space, it's getting stronger. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? She pointed to the holographic display, where a faint but steady pulse was growing more distinct. It was the same ancient frequency they had detected earlier, but now it carried something new. A message. The commander leaned closer, his breath catching as the words scrolled across the screen. They were in older script, a language barely used anymore, but he recognized them instantly. The first failsafe has been activated. Stand by. His mind raced. A failsafe? Was it a contingency plan left by the original crew of the ancient fleet? Or was it something more sinister? Before he could fully process the implications, the corrupted ship began to shift again. Its glowing veins pulsed with an intensity that made the bridge lights flicker. The Void threat's energy surged, as if feeding off the ship's transformation. And then, the ship spoke. The voice wasn't like the figure they had encountered earlier. This one was colder, mechanical, and utterly devoid of emotion. It echoed through the comms, cutting through the chaos with chilling clarity. Failsafe acknowledged. Initiating final sequence. The commander's blood ran cold. Whatever this failsafe was, it wasn't something they could control. The corrupted ship began to emit a low-frequency hum that resonated through the fleet, its tone growing louder and more dissonant with each passing second. Ships in its vicinity started to falter, their systems going offline as the hum grew in intensity. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a signal, a call to something far worse. Sir, we're detecting massive energy spikes across the sector. Another officer shouted. It's not just the Void threat, it's everywhere. The holographic display updated, showing energy signatures flaring up across the galaxy. Each one matched the corrupted ship's frequency. The commander's chest tightened as the realization hit him. The Void threat hadn't just found one ship. It had found the entire fleet. The failsafe wasn't a plan to destroy the Void. It was a contingency to ensure the ancient fleet's survival, no matter the cost. And now, those ships were awakening, their corrupted systems syncing with the void's energy to form a network of devastation. Humanity's past mistakes weren't just returning to haunt them, they were threatening to consume the galaxy. The commander took a shaky breath, forcing himself to focus. "We still have a chance," he said, his voice firm despite the rising panic around him. "If we can disrupt the signal, break the connection between the ships, we can stop this before it's too late." "How?" one of his officers asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to the tactical display, his mind racing. The answer was painfully clear, even if it felt like an impossible gamble. "We need to overload the corrupted ship's core," he said. "If we can force it into a critical state, the energy backlash might sever the signal. But it has to be done from inside." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. They all knew what that meant. The commander didn't hesitate. "Prepare a strike team," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll lead it myself." The crew protested, but he silenced them with a sharp look. This wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. As the team assembled, he gave one final order to the fleet. "Hold the line. No matter what happens, buy us the time we need." The shuttle ride to the corrupted ship was a blur. The team moved with grim determination, their weapons at the ready. As they breached the ship's outer hull, the oppressive energy enveloped them, pressing down like a physical weight. The corridors twisted and shifted, the ship's living structure responding to their presence. They fought their way to the core, their path littered with the remnants of the ancient crew. The figures they encountered were no longer human, twisted forms of flesh and metal, driven by the ship's corrupted will. But the team pressed on, their resolve unshaken. When they reached the core chamber, the commander's breath caught. The glowing figure from before was there, its form now fully integrated into the ship's systems. It turned to face them, its voice filling their minds once more. "You cannot stop this. The failsafe is beyond your control." The commander stepped forward, his weapon aimed. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not here to stop it. I'm here to end it." The figure hesitated, as if studying him. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. The commander took advantage of the moment, motioning for his team to set the charges. The core pulsed with energy, its glow growing brighter as the ship fought to maintain control. As the final charge was placed, the figure spoke again, its voice tinged with something that might have been regret. "You do not understand what you are destroying. This is humanity's legacy." The commander met its gaze, his expression hard. "Maybe it is. But it's a legacy we can't afford to keep." He activated the charges, the countdown ticking down with agonizing slowness. The figure didn't move to stop him. Instead, it simply watched, its form flickering as the ship began to collapse around them. The team raced back to the shuttle, the corridors crumbling as the core's energy spiraled out of control. As they launched back to the fleet, the corrupted ship imploded, its energy collapsing inward in a blinding flash. The void threat's connection shattered, its tendrils dissipating into the void. The remaining ships of the ancient fleet went dark, their signals silenced. For a moment, there was only silence. But as the fleet regrouped, a new signal emerged, a faint but unmistakable frequency, different from the corrupted ships. The commander stared at the display, his chest tightening as the message played. It was a recording, left by the original crew of the ancient fleet. "To those who find this, we did what we thought was necessary. But if you are hearing this, then we failed. Learn from our mistakes. Do not repeat them." The commander closed his eyes, the weight of their words settling over him. Humanity had faced the void and survived, but at a cost they were still paying. The battle was over, but the scars it left behind would remain. As the fleet drifted in the aftermath, the commander couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The void threat was defeated, but the echoes of humanity's past still lingered, waiting to resurface when they least expected it. And when that time came, he could only hope they would be ready. The aftermath of the battle left the fleet eerily quiet. Debris from the corrupted ship floated aimlessly in space, faintly glowing with the remnants of the void's energy. The once chaotic battlefield now felt like a graveyard, a reminder of the destruction that had nearly consumed them all. On board the command ship, the crew worked tirelessly to assess the damage and tend to the wounded, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had survived, but no one felt victorious. The commander sat in his quarters, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. He stared at the recording that played on a loop on his console. The voices of the ancient fleet's crew echoed softly, their regret almost palpable. "We did what we thought was necessary. But if you are hearing this, then we failed." He paused the recording, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his temples. The words stayed with him, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. What had they truly inherited from humanity's past? And how much of it could they bear to keep? A soft knock at the door broke his concentration. One of his officers stepped in, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Commander, the fleet has regrouped. Repairs are underway, and the civilian ships are reporting minimal casualties." "But there's something else." The commander sat up, his expression sharpening. "What is it?" She shifted uneasily, then handed him a data pad. "We've picked up another signal. It's coming from deep within the debris field of the corrupted ship." He frowned, taking the pad and scanning the information. The signal was faint but persistent, broadcasting on the same frequency as the ancient fleet's failsafe. His stomach tightened. After everything they had just endured, the idea of more surprises was almost unbearable. But he couldn't ignore it. "Prepare a shuttle," he said, standing. "I'll check it out myself." The officer hesitated. "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" "After everything I know," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "But if there's one thing we've learned, it's that ignoring the past doesn't make it go away." The shuttle ride to the debris field was tense. The crew accompanying him exchanged nervous glances, their fingers twitching near their weapons as they scanned the floating wreckage. The corrupted ship had been reduced to fragments, but the faint signal pulsing from its remains felt alive, as if the ship still had secrets it wasn't ready to give up. They traced the signal to a small, intact section of the ship's core, sealed off from the destruction around it. The commander's heart raced as they breached the chamber, their flashlights cutting through the dim, flickering light. In the center of the room was a single console, its screen glowing faintly with ancient text. The signal originated here. The commander approached cautiously, his boots echoing softly on the metal floor. The console's screen blinked, displaying a message in the same old Earth script as before. It was a question. "Do you wish to proceed?" He hesitated, his mind racing. Was this another trap? Another layer of the failsafe? But something about the message felt different. It wasn't cold or calculated like the voice of the corrupted ship. It felt curious, almost as if it were waiting for him to make a choice. "Proceed," he said, his voice steady. The console's screen shifted, displaying a series of images and text. Blueprints for ships, records of battles, logs of decisions made by the ancient fleet's commanders. It was a history, preserved and hidden within the corrupted ship's core. But as the commander scanned the data, he realized it wasn't just a record of the past. It was a warning. The ancient fleet hadn't just been fighting the void. They had been experimenting with it, trying to harness its power as a weapon. Their failsafe wasn't just a contingency, it was their last, desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. And in the end, it had consumed them. The final entry in the log was from the fleet's lead scientist. Her words were stark and filled with regret. "We thought we could master the void. We thought we could bend it to our will. But the void does not serve. It only takes. If you are reading this, then learn from our arrogance. Destroy this knowledge. Do not let it fall into the wrong hands." The commander stepped back, his heart pounding. The weight of the revelation settled over him. The ancient fleet hadn't just failed, they had doomed themselves and nearly doomed humanity along with them. He turned to his crew, his voice steady but grim. Wipe the core. All of it. This knowledge dies here. The crew hesitated but obeyed. As they worked to dismantle the console and erase its data, the commander stared out at the wreckage around them. Humanity had come close to repeating the mistakes of the past, but they still had a chance to choose a different path. When they returned to the fleet, the mood was somber but resolute. The commander addressed the crew and the civilians, sharing what they had learned and the decision they had made. The past has lessons to teach us, but it is not a road map. We must be better. We must choose our future, not let it be dictated by the ghosts of those who came before us. His words resonated, a reminder of what they had fought for and what they still stood to protect. The fleet resumed its journey, carrying not just survivors but a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced the void and survived, but their true challenge lay ahead, building a future worthy of the sacrifices they had made. As the fleet drifted through the stars, the commander found himself staring out at the vast expanse of space. It was quiet now, the void's presence gone, but its memory lingered. He thought of the ancient fleet, of the choices they had made and the legacy they had left behind. And he thought of the warning in the scientist's final words. The future was uncertain, as it had always been. But for the first time in a long while, the commander felt a flicker of hope. Humanity had answered the call when the galaxy needed heroes. Now, it was their turn to ensure that the galaxy never had to face such a threat again. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, he knew one thing for certain: they would be ready.